Hello and shalom, brothers and sisters of Messiah Yeshua. Welcome back. I'm Jeremy, and this is Megalithic Japan before the flood. Another video in the Megalithic Millennium and Before the Flood series, where we take a break from our typical biblical studies and teachings to look at some of these megalithic sites around the world, because I believe that before there was a biblical flood, there was a Stone Age megalithic world. It was a civilization built in stone, buried by the biblical flood. This flood covered that whole Stone Age world in water, leaving behind rubble, debris, buried ruins, fossils, and mud as evidence for us that the Word of God is still true, accurate, and relevant for us today. Alright, so with that said, let's get started. Today we're going over to Japan, and we always start out with Genesis 6:5. It says, "And Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." So because of that, he sent a flood to destroy the world, and I believe that the evidence is still there today. So we're going over to Japan, and here's Japan, a little island. Not quite a little island, but quite a big island. Over there in this area of the world. And if you look over there to the right, you can see where Japan is. But what we're going to look at today is lots of similarities with Japan and other places in the world, such as Egypt and Peru, and just the distance between these, and how can there be so many similarities. But we're going to look at those today. All right, so let's start off first with Osaka Castle. Now, I know there's a lot of debate with this one, but I find it interesting that it's the stones that are here are polygonal, and they're put together so well, and I don't think there's any evidence out there that shows how this was constructed and when, really. Again, when we look at the dating for everything, all of our known dating, if you take carbon dating out of it and just use our texts and everything that man recorded, only goes back 4,000 to 5,000 years. And before carbon dating came around, that was agreed upon by pretty much everybody, that we couldn't find anything older than that. Now with carbon dating, you'll find stuff that says, oh, they were 11,000 years old. It's only because they found some pottery that they carbon dated, or that had some animals or bones or something, because you can't carbon date stone. Only things that have carbon in them, living things, such as people, plants, and animals. All right, so moving on with the dating, look into that at some time. Maybe I'll do a video on that in depth. I've talked about it before, the carbon 12 versus the carbon 14. And they even say that moving forward, the generations, if the world was to continue another 1,000 years, they wouldn't be able to carbon date any of that time anymore, because our atmosphere has changed so much because of our vehicles and nuclear weapons and so forth, that we have changed the way that the carbon 14 and 12 react and get placed into these things. But I find that interesting, because if that's the case, how do they not know that there was a worldwide flood? And we know from evidence that oxygen was different in the atmosphere. At one point, there was up to 35% oxygen. So how do we know that carbon 12 and carbon 14 even reacted the same that it does today? The answer is we don't, unless we were able to go back and test it, which we can't. So the only thing that we can really go off of is one thing. I believe the Bible, because it says it's very historically accurate, and many times when we say, oh, there's contradictions, or this didn't happen, or that didn't happen, it turns out we actually find the evidence for it. So anyway, moving on with Osaka Castle. So here you can just see some of the polygonal masonry and the megalithic structures built, and we'll go through some of these pictures pretty quick. But if you look here, you can see in the background how they stacked some of these stones back together, but some of them are tightly fit together. So at one point, you can see they were tightly fit together. And I don't know if you can see it, but pay close attention to the tree off to the right. If you look to the right side of the base of the tree, you'll see a stone so tightly fit together and cut in that T shape. How did that get there? And who took the time to do that? Anyway, we see stuff like that in Peru, in Egypt, in Italy, in all places around the world that we've looked at with the polygonal masonry. And here's some more of the stones that are tightly fit together. And people have probably seen these pictures before of this giant stone that's here. Now, I have not been here, so I don't know if that stone is actually connected to the bedrock or if it was placed there. Maybe some of you guys know, I'm not sure. But either way, if it was carved or placed there, that's a pretty hefty feat to do. And here's some more stones you can see the size. And then the picture to the left at Osaka Castle, you can see there's still megalithic stones that are just laying around buried that they still have to dig up. And why are they still buried? I believe it was because a worldwide flood came through and caused a catastrophe that laid all these things down as evidence for us today. All right, so some more stones. Now, I'm not sure if these are modern cut, because yes, we can do these modern cuts today. It's a lot of work and it's very expensive, but we don't do, and I don't know any place that's done the polygonal masonry with the waves and the unstraight lines. But this, what we see here, this we can do fairly easy today. All right, so this is the Imperial Palace in Japan, so quite like the Osaka Castle, the same megalithic stones, and you can see here the polygonal masonry. And off to the right you can see tightly fit together, and then other stones that were kind of just stacked together, almost as if they put them in place after some sort of earthquake or whatever knocked them out, and they had to rebuild the structure, as I've said before, like Legos. And just some more pictures. Again, and more polygonal type masonry and megalithic stone walls. So with that, show some pictures here. Japan on the left and Peru on the right. You can see not only straight lines but wavy cut lines. But with both Japan and Peru, you can see here in Egypt we have the polygonal masonry as well, and this was buried for thousands of years until they started digging up the Sphinx in the 1920s, and then they found this temple that they had no idea was even there. And these stones are very, very large. All right, and here's another stone with polygonal masonry in Japan. And then polygonal masonry over to the left, you can see this is some stonework that was found in an ancient kofun in Japan. And so what kofuns are, if you look to the right, kofun or tumuli, they look like these key-shaped tombs, and they're scattered all over Japan. They kind of remind me of of India and those things I've showed you there, that are scattered all over the place there. And there's literally thousands or millions of those lingam all over, but they kind of look like those lingam in India. And I showed you those before. I don't know if they almost look like a juice press. But this keyhole shape, we find this we found them in Peru. They found them in Saudi Arabia. Not quite tombs, but just laid out, thousands of them, rocks, and they don't know how they got there. But here in Japan, they're called kofun or tumuli. And so we'll take a look at some of these. You can see here the vegetation has grown up over them. Now, I think many of them, they don't even allow them to go in and excavate and find out what's in the tombs. But if they find them broken, I think that they take them out and put them in museums and stuff. But here you can kind of get a look of what it looks like underneath all the vegetation. And then here's a picture of the area of just how many of those kofun are there. And they're all over, just like we find in their megalithic in structure. We'll look at some of these things that they've found inside the tombs and things. But here's an aerial picture of some of them. Another picture. And so you can see they're just strewn about. And then here's some more off to the left, some different types. You can see carved directly into the stone on the left. And then this is kind of an overview of what they show, how they, these mounds that they build and what's inside. If you look at that, the top right up there. And it kind of looks like the Enterprise from Star Trek, but they know that there's a tomb, but they don't know how they built them or who built them or why. And if you can see this picture, you can see there is a sarcophagus inside. And we're going to take a look at these because they found many of them, and they are very closely related to what we find in Egypt. And so here's kind of what that looked like and the things around it. All right, so here's a replica of one of them. I believe they made this replica because they left that one in place. Like I said, I think if they're not destroyed or whatever, if they don't touch them, they leave them alone, which is probably appreciated very much by whoever's buried in them. But here's several that they found that were broken, and you can see they have the protuberances on them like we've found all around the world, and these are found in Japan. Megalithic in size, cut, very detailed. I'll take a look at some more close-up pictures. But all cut out of solid stone, one piece, and here's a broke-off piece of side wall of one. But here you can see that specific protuberance off to the right that we see all over the place. Now I showed it. I will probably be showing in a video later what I think those protuberances were for. I could be wrong, but at a place in Turkey, there was a structure built with them all over, and some of them were not finished, but there were other ones finished, and where they left the protuberances, you could see they were carving small, like detailed things like birds and animals and stuff. So did they leave them for something to be done at a later date and they just didn't get around to it because the worldwide flood buried it? I don't know. But here you can see that this stone, now broken, the sarcophagus was very large in size and tightly fit together. Here's another one. And again, you can see the protuberances in that middle stone that were chipped away now, but they were there. And here's another one. You can see the protuberance on the end there. And then these are ones that are found in Egypt at Saqqara, buried under the ground out there. And you can see the protuberances sticking out just like we found in Japan. And again, there's a picture of one of the sarcophagus in Egypt and the one that they found in Japan that you can't go visit this one. It's off limits. And I think they're still digging it up and stuff. And I think you can see some of the things they've put in the museum, but I don't know if this specific box is yet, and we'll take a look at that later. And then just going back to Egypt real quick, you can see they dig way down into the bedrock. The picture to the left is at Saqqara as well. Both of these are at Saqqara, Egypt, but the one to the left is just open air to the public, and you can look down there and see that. I think I took that picture to the left in 2010, and when I went back there a few years ago, it's almost completely buried, so you can't even see what's down there. But it's so deep that you can't get down in there and really take a look at what that is. I believe it might be an unfinished sarcophagus or box. But like I said, they have let the dirt and trash and everything start covering it, so I don't know what is actually under that dirt. But anyway, the one to the right, this is inside the stepped pyramid. If you go in to visit, this is what you'll find, and it goes down, and you can see these places where they lay these things. And what was found inside that box to the right, I don't know as well. I think there's videos out there that show, but I don't have one. I don't have the information here. Anyway, I wanted to show you these big open holes. You can see this is outside of the Giza pyramid, in between the pyramid and the Sphinx. They're found all over Egypt, and you can see the striations, right? I've showed you these striations all over in Egypt and India and China, all over the world pretty much. It's kind of the same patterns, long patterns, or the small patterns that go left to right, left to right. And we'll see that here today in Japan as well. All right, and then these are the protuberances found both inside the Great Pyramid, and then protuberances found on outside of the pyramids as well. So why are people in Peru and Egypt and Japan and all the other places that we found carving stone this way, and what was it for? Again, this channel, I'm not trying to find the answers to why these things were done and what they used them for. My sole purpose is to show that I believe these things were created before the flood, the biblical flood narrative, and that they're left for us as evidence today. And that's why nobody can really figure out what they were for, is we were never really supposed to know. And we'll look at that from some of the ancient books as well here in a minute. All right, so here's some more that they found inside kofuns. This is the, I can't even pronounce the words sometimes. It's a Seki Jinsen kofun. And this one's still left in there. They didn't take this out. And here's another one. This one's very, obviously, it probably didn't look like that. And again, I don't know if it's carved out of the bedrock and left there, or if this was placed in there. But you can see there's bad water damage or whatever moisture that's ruined this stone. But that one's left in there as well. So let's go to that place where I talked about that we found that sarcophagus that you can't go visit right now. It's Ueyama Kofun, or Tamuli, and this is in Asuka, Japan. We'll look at some other things that are here as well, but so this is what they found buried. And like I said, I think they're still excavating this place. Here's another picture of it. And then you can see as they open it down. Now, I don't know what they found in there, or if they found anything. These are just pictures that people get off the internet. I'm sure soon, as more people find out about this place, they're going to be trying to go in and take pictures, and you'll find more information on the web about it. But for right now, there's not much that people can get much information. All right, and so here's some more pictures of it. You can see it was broken. Now, is that how they found it? I don't know. Did they open it up and break it? I don't know. But I'm sure that, again, once whatever they find or whatever, when it's all said and done, they'll release the information to us, I'm sure. However, Japan and China are they keep a lot of these things quiet to outsiders. Like we looked at before with China, it wasn't until recently they even started allowing outsiders to visit these places and even know about them. Here's just some more things they found down there. I don't know what that is. Here's a closer picture of it. But you can see these things are buried down in there. Megalithic stones. So at Osukunara in Japan, this place is found. Here's another, I guess you would call this a kofun or a tumuli. It's megalithic stone, and when you go inside, there's whatever that was that for water, or that trench that's coming out of there. I'm not sure, but these things are found all over Japan as well. These megalithic stones, and I'm not sure if it was a tomb or what it was, but it's just stone placed upon a stone. We see these with dolmens. If you can look up those later, I'll do another video on dolmens just by themselves at another period. All right, so here's some more things they found around the area. Again, what they're used for, they don't know, but they were buried. They dig them up, and there's several things just laid about. Again, don't know what they were used for, why they were cut, but they're there. And people have probably seen all of these pictures. As they're coming out more and more, people are going to visit them, and there's better pictures being taken. Again, I haven't been here to Japan to see these. I will be going to Japan here pretty soon, and so I'm going to try to visit some of these things and take some pictures. All right, and then I'll share those with you guys. All right, so here's in Ishi no Hoden in Japan. This stone, again, it has some of the striation markings that we're familiar with. It's very large in size, and it was almost like it's not finished being cut from the bedrock. It's still connected to the bedrock, but you can see how large this thing is, and how are they going to move this? As we look at some of these pictures, just the sheer size of this thing. And again, nobody knows what it was going to be used for. But you can look under there, it's still connected. They had not yet finished cutting this to use it for whatever it was going to be used for. And here's just some more pictures of it. And there's a visitor center or whatever that is outside that you can go. I don't know if outsiders can go see it or not. Like I said, I haven't been here. And you can see that there's debris still left up on top of it. And I know some people, not the greatest of evidence for a worldwide flood, but a lot of these places have debris that's just still left up there. And some of the debris that's up there, the rocks and everything, aren't from the local cutting that they're doing around that area. All right, and these were just found on the web, some measurements and writing about them, about this area, if you want to take a look at those. So some other mentions that we don't have really a lot of time to go through. There's a lot of megalithic cut structures like we find in India, here in Japan, cut right into bedrock. These are, I believe they're used as tombs, if that was the original intent. I'm not sure, but I believe that there's hundreds of these as well all over Japan, and I believe they're very sacred to the people. But you can look these up, and again, it's almost like a negative shape on the outside as the kofun that we looked at, the keyhole ones, but these ones are now, instead of raised, they're cut into stone. And also through Japan, we find structures on the right, like carved into stone like these that you see, which is very reminiscent. That looks a lot like what we find in Turkey. And we'll take a look at those, Derinkuyu and other places in Turkey that are found, again, carved into stone, just like we find here in Japan, like we find in India and other places around the world. And just here's some more pictures of some of these places in Japan where they've cut directly into the bedrock. Again, this is Japan, but you would think that this was India, as they cut deep into the bedrock in India and China. I've showed you like Dazu caves and so forth. And just other places in Japan, you can see there's stuff still buried out there as well, waiting to be dug up and found. But what I want to talk about real quick is Mount Nokogiri, with similarities. If you look at this picture, we're going to take a look at this area. They call it a quarry, but if you look closely, you're going to see the same striations, the exact same striations that we found in Egypt, in Petra, in India, in China, but we're also finding them here in Japan. So this area, it's just a big mountainside, and there's a lot of stuff still hidden here. As they walk through, people have pictures of things that are stones that look like they've been cut and that are just laying and buried all over the area. But as you go through, you have large cut structures, megalithic in nature, that are carved out of pure stone that they've fixed. You'll see some of these, the picture on the left, they've added stones to it to fix what was there, because there was a lot of damage to it over time. And then the picture to the right, you can see this quarry, how large it is. And what I want you to notice is from the ground all the way up to the top, the striations that we see all around the world are on this mountainside. And how did that happen so high up? How did they cut this rock straight down like they did so high? So here's a better picture of that, and you can see where they put the stones to fix it. Off to the right, you can see their block stones used with mortar to fix it, but the original structure was carved directly out of the stone. And if you look at the sun disk around this thing at the very top, you can see half of it is pure stone from the bedrock, and the other half is stone that they've stacked together to fix it with mortar. And you can see the size of this thing with the people sitting down below. So again, another structure that would take just a tremendous amount of time to do. And I think this, I don't know the exact height of it, but I think it's at least the same size, like we've talked about Mount Rushmore before. Mount Rushmore is about 60 feet, and it took years to do that thing with dynamite and jackhammers. And they tell us that they did these with, just regular picks or regular chisels and things like that. And it just doesn't make any sense. All right, so here's another structure that's found there, but if you look to the left and to the right, you can see those same striations, the ones going left and right, like we see all over the world. But yes, we have machines that make the striations like that ourselves today. They're bigger striations. It's a machine with a wheel, diamond cut, like spikes that cut through the mountain and the rock that leave behind striations like these, but they didn't have these back in the 8th century or whatnot when they say these things were made. So how did they cut these quarries and so high up? As you can see, it's got those striations all around it, and then the detailed structure in between, and just the size of them. You can see the striations all around. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I find it interesting, and I could be completely wrong, but I find that these structures in India and Japan and this area of the world with these so-called deities that have this little mark on their forehead. And the Bible mentions a certain person that went out and built his house with stone and everything else, and God placed a mark on his forehead. Anyway, I just find that interesting. Are these the two in the same? I don't know. Did they worship Cain because he received the mark? I don't know. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying that the people from India or whatever are the descendants of Cain, but I find it interesting that all these deities that are carved in the wall, I believe they found them after the flood and they worshipped them as deities, and the people there started putting the marks on their forehead because these things are all over carved in stone with this mark on their forehead. All right, anyway, I digress. Moving back to the striations. So you can see these striations evenly spaced together and how high up that they go, and it's all over this mountainside, just as we found in China, just as we found in Egypt, in India, and all over the world. And again, here's the height of this quarry. And these striations are all over. This whole mountainside is cut out. And here you can see them a little bit closer and how far down they go. And then here's a picture of that mountainside that we just looked at. And I stretched it out so it's kind of, it doesn't do it justice stretching it out, but you can see how high it is. So more of the striations you can see off to the left and the right. More of them as you walk through this whole area. In the picture off to the right, you can see that little standing area that you can look out over, just how high up it goes, and all of this cut with those same striations. Now, when we cut out a mountain today, like we drill down into the side of the rock and we place dynamite in it to blast it away, and it leaves that. But these striations are very high up and they go straight down on the left and the right. So how did they get the machines required to do that in there? Because if you look at our machines that do the striations like these today, they are very large and their arms do not go up that high. So how did they accomplish this? Nobody knows. And here's some more pictures. You can see the height again. There's no rhyme or reason, no pattern or whatever where they were cutting these out and what it was for, but we do find just areas where they've carved out those, different deities or whatever, and what they were used for we don't know. But what's interesting is if you look to these pictures, you can also see that much of this place is still buried as well. So how did it get buried? Because there's nothing above it. Again, no mountains above it. These are the highest points. But how did they get buried? And you can see more pictures here where buried rubble debris are coming in. And so this is going deep down from the level that we are at. You had the height going way up, but now you also have where they were cutting deep down into the mountain. What it was for, again, don't know. So also, we're going to go away from that quarry. There's another quarry in Japan, and there's probably others. This one's called the Yabuzuku quarry, and you can see here the same striations, it's buried as well. If you look to this picture to the left, you can see there's some stacked stones in there that they want to either cover up a hole or whatnot, but those aren't megalithic in nature, they're just stacked. Coming inside, you can see that these carvings, I find it interesting that if you look at the hole that's carved through the stone to the right, the perfectly square hole, it starts to go up. We find that in Egypt as well. All over, every pyramid that's there has that. And then here's just some more pictures to look at of this quarry and the striations and it being buried. And more buried. And another close-up of some of these of this stonework just carved, and there's no real reason, or it's no rhyme or reason of what they were doing here. All right. So, found this on the internet. I just found it was funny. It says if you believe they moved a 160-ton piece of granite to carve into a bathtub for one regular-sized human to play with is rubber ducky, you're sadly mistaken. I think this was found in Russia. I don't know if it's real or not. I haven't really taken the time, but I just found that funny that we find these things and some of the things they say that they were used for or when they were carved. It doesn't make sense. All right, so let's get to the biblical part of it, right? It says, "And you have said that my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And you have saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." So two things, right? The evil of man's heart was only evil continually, and there are the giants in the earth. And these are the two things that it says that the flood came and destroyed the earth. And in Jude, he talks about it as well. He says, "The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." If you keep reading in Jude, he goes on and he likens it to Sodom and Gomorrah, where they were doing sexual things that it talks about, like these angels did. And I know people have a hard time with the book of Jubilees and the book of Enoch, but when we go to these places around the world, this is kind of what we see carved in stone as the evidence that these things did happen before the flood. We see pictures carved in stone of people, half man, half animals, or people that are regular sized and large sized. I didn't pay much homage to that through this video. I wanted kind of just to wrap up all of those striations with Japan. But I think the next video that we do in this series will be taking a look at these angels and things that we see, these deities that they believed were deities, but we know the Bible tells us they were angels that did something they weren't supposed to do. All right, so with that said, all right, the flood, we still have the scars in the earth today that show us that there was a worldwide flood. And that the Bible says the fountains of the great deep broke open. We have that evidence still here today. And we can see, they call it the plate theory. And some talk about Pangea, and I've spoke about that. These continents didn't drift to become what they are today. The water came up from these scars and pushed the sand, rubble, debris, and everything to with high pressure, which carved out the continents that we see today. And then again, this is the plate theory. And I know we've talked about it many times, but I'm just going to put it up here again. We'll move on from here. In Jubilees 4:31, it talks about Cain, that he built his house with stone before the flood, and that because he killed Abel with stone, his house fell on him and he was killed by stone. Also in the book of Jubilees, it tells us that the cities after the flood, that people went and found them and seized for them these cities that were there. And that's what I believe is, after the languages were changed, the people scattered around the world, they found these cities. They couldn't speak what was written on the wall. That's why even today we don't know many of these languages, because there's no one there that knows them, because they were all pre-flood. But they found these cities, they lived there, and they worshipped and believed that the things that were carved into the stone were gods that created them or whatnot, not knowing that they were angels that were that did not keep their first estate and taught men things they weren't supposed to. And we find that in Jubilees, where it talks about the rocks that were carved in stone were before the flood, and they contained the teaching of the watchers. So the things that were carved into the stone were from the watchers. This comes from the book of Jubilees. And then in Genesis, right, we've looked at this where people say, well, they built, the Israelites or the Hebrews or whatever built these places, and that's just not true. Genesis says that they built with brick for stone. They didn't use stone, they used brick because they couldn't cut the stone like the people before the flood were able to. And then also in Exodus 5:7, the Israelites that were in Egypt, again, they didn't carve using stone. It says that they used straw and they made brick. And I've showed you those pictures from Egypt before where you can still see that mud brick there today with the straw in it. But it's on top of the megalithic stone that was there before the Israelites went in there. And then in Enoch, it talks about the watchers, how they taught when they came to procreate with women, that they taught worthless mysteries, that they didn't have the good knowledge, the good mysteries that God has reserved for those that love Him. All right. So with that said, I think next time we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these angels, and we're going to get into the weeds a little bit more about these things. And this is some stuff right from Assyria and Sumerian. We're going to look a little bit at the language and some of the cuneiform tablets and things like that, and what language was actually on these stones when they found them buried versus what came later. And as you can see, these things were not only a little bit buried, but a lot buried by a worldwide flood. And we're going to see what we're going to try to put all this stuff together in the next couple of videos with the Megalithic Millennium series. So with that said, in 2 Peter 3:3 it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. And we hear that from people today, either saying he already came or he's never going to come, and they scoff at it. And it goes on, it says, for this they willingly are ignorant, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So he's saying that the water contained the earth, and the earth was out of the water and in the water, but by the water it perished, right? It overflowed with water and destroyed the whole earth. And many people just mock at that today. They say, oh no, there wasn't a worldwide flood, it was the Younger Dryas, or all the ice caps melted and these things, and it was 10,000 years ago, or 20 or a billion years ago. But the Bible only tells us that these things happened only about 4,000 years ago, a little over 4,500 years ago. And all of our language and our history and our documents of mankind only goes back that far. Everything else that we date further than that comes from carbon dating, which, again, maybe one day we'll do a study on that. But there's so many videos out there. Look at both sides. Look at the good side and the people, what people are saying that it's accurate, and the people that are telling you to not trust it. Whether they believe the Bible or not, there are scientists and everything else that are saying it doesn't work. Anyway, I'll leave that for another time. It goes on in 2 Peter 3:7, it says, but the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire, against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. The day of fire is not for the godly and those that turn from darkness to light, but to the ungodly. And God He so loves the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever shall turn shall not perish, but have everlasting life. He begs us, He wishes that none should perish, but that all would come to repentance. So that's my heart to you. Kind of get into the Bible and start studying the Word and find out, what does it actually say? Can you prove these things? Because I wasn't always religious or wanting to know the Bible or anything. I loved the partying and all that stuff in this world. But it wasn't until I went out to find God and studying many religions and everything else. And if the Bible said that these things happened, that there was a worldwide flood and people lived to be 1,000 years old, is that true? And can we find the evidence for that today? And the answer is yes. If you go search it, you're going to find it. All right. But it's reserved for fire, and we know that where the water came bursting out, now the majority of the world's volcanoes are along these fault lines and these places where the crack in the Earth's crust is, where that water came spewing out. We also know that fire can come out by that. And we also have weapons of mass destruction with fire that 2,000 years ago, when these apostles were writing about these things, could have never have known that all of these volcanoes were around the world and that we would have nuclear weapons that could destroy continents with fire. And as you can see, all over the world, all these little red dots are many of the volcanoes, all along these areas. But it says, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to us word, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So people always say, well, why would God kill everyone? He doesn't want that. He wants all to come to repentance. But those that don't cannot enter eternity. Anyway, go look at some of the two ways videos and the covenants, and look at some of the biblical teachings on these things to see what that means as we move forward. He goes on in Peter, he says, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that there are in shall be burned up. And we've talked about the day of the Lord. We'll look at that here in a minute. But I know many people scoff at this thing of 6,000 years, but I came to that conclusion that the Bible teaches that we are waiting for 6,000 years, and the 7,000th year will be the millennial rest. I came to that conclusion well before I ever read some of these other documents. And in the Epistle of Barnabas, he talks about the same thing when he speaks of the Sabbath, the seventh day, or the seventh millennium. He says this: the Sabbath is mentioned at the beginning of creation, and God made in 6 days the work of his hands, and made an end of the seventh day, and rested on it, and sanctified it. Attend, my children, to the meaning of this expression, he finished in 6 days. This implies that the Lord will finish all things in 6,000 years. For a day is with him as 1,000 years. And he himself testifies, saying, behold, today will be as 1,000 years. Therefore, my children, in 6 days, that is, in 6,000 years, all things will be finished. And he rested on the seventh day. This means when his Son, coming again, Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus Christ, when he comes, shall destroy the time of the wicked man, that is, Hasatan, the one that is in charge over the evil, and judge the ungodly, and change the sun, the moon, and the stars. Then shall he truly rest on the seventh day. It's my belief that the earth will tilt. I could be wrong, but that causes, when Yeshua returns, it causes the earth to tilt. The day changes. It's no longer the length of years different than it used to be. And I believe the atmosphere changes, and people will live to be 1,000 years again. But with that, I'm going to do a teaching probably next time or a couple of times from now, where I'm going to go through this again a little bit more in reference to all that we read from Barnabas. Like I said, I came up with this diagram and everything else a long time before I ever read that passage from the Epistle of Barnabas. So it's not just there that it's found. I came up with it only from the Bible, but it's also found in Jubilees, in Enoch, and all these other books that we have since found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But today many are not looking at them carefully enough. We just assume that they are written by people that were living out in the wilderness, and they were kind of heretical and lost in their way. But if you haven't seen the teaching, the Dead Sea Scrolls are alive, I would encourage you to go listen to that. But if you take a look at this, in each creation day, yes, God created everything in 6 literal days, but he patterned each day after something that was going to happen in each millennial period, and I go through that I'll go through all this in a teaching coming up later. But all right. With that said, brothers and sisters, please look at what's going on in the world with everything that we see today. As many of the things that Yeshua wrote about to watch in the prophets, and they told us the things to look for his return. And I believe with many others that he's coming soon, very soon. And as you can see in this diagram, the sixth day, we are in the sixth millennium. We don't exactly know when it ends and when the seventh starts, but we know that the seventh will start when Yeshua rules and reigns. But before it starts, like we read from Peter and many of the other apostles, that there is a worldwide catastrophe coming. But those who are Yeshua's will be saved and will be able to rule and reign with him for 1,000 years, where there will be no more war. We will have rest during the true Sabbath. We will have no people will live to be 1,000 years ago again, and it'll be good. But we'll talk about that later in a later video. I just encourage you guys, with all these videos that are coming out, ancient aliens and all these things, they now know that the evolutionary teachings and those things are being proven wrong, and so they're now trying to come up with a new narrative. Oh, well, it's 11,000 and 12,000 to get you to not trust the Bible. But in every time that I have tried to test if the Bible is true and historically accurate, it always reigns true. And there has never been a point where you can disprove it. And that every time that people think that they can, many people go into the Bible studying it, trying to disprove it, end up turning into believers because of how accurate it actually is in telling us what's happening, because that's what God does. He knows the end from the beginning, and he gave it to us. And I believe he gave it to us in the 6 days of creation. We'll go over that next time. All right, so brothers and sisters, with that said, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his face upon you and give you peace. Shalom.